Have you ever found yourself working hard, living kindly, giving your all, yet still not being truly respected? They remain polite, they smile, they invite you into the conversation, but when it's time to be heard, to be trusted, to be named, you're not there. They don't hate you. It's just, you don't carry enough weight for anyone to truly lean in. Respect doesn't come from a louder voice or a higher title. It comes from something quieter, small habits, repeated every day, that are either lifting you up or quietly pulling you down. In this video, you'll discover 7 seemingly harmless habits, yet they draw the line between someone who's merely likable and someone truly worthy of respect. We're not here to teach you to toughen up. We're here to help you release what's quietly been causing you to lose your true gravity. Join Stoic App on a journey to reclaim your personal worth, not with slogans but with quiet, steady discipline that no one can lend you and no one can take away. And if you've ever felt like you deserve to be heard, more don't leave this video. 1. Speaking as if you know, even when you've never lived it. You've met someone like that before, haven't you? Sitting in a meeting, they speak as if they've lived through it all. They have advice for every problem, an argument for every scenario, and they always speak with this startling confidence, as if truth itself had whispered to them in a past life. But the longer you listen, the stranger it feels. Something's off, not quite a lie, just hollow, as if they're recycling someone else's experience, borrowing the words of a book, wearing a coat they've never stitched themselves. You look closer and then you understand. They're borrowing wisdom, just to be respected. I know that type better than anyone, because once upon a time, I was that person. Early in my career, I walked into meetings carrying a whole library of learned knowledge. I read a lot, memorized well, and knew how to talk in a way that made others nod. I mastered the art of quoting at the right moment, using precise words, and hiding my insecurities behind an aura of expertise. People listened, people nodded. I mistook that for respect, but in truth, it was only politeness. Until one day, in an important meeting with seasoned professionals, I confidently spoke about a market trend, something I'd never actually tested. I quoted numbers from an article I had just read the week before, adding a few sharp-sounding conclusions, as if I'd spent a decade in that field. Everyone nodded until Mr. David, my direct supervisor with over 30 years of real experience, suddenly looked up, stared straight at me, and asked, "Where did you learn that?" I froze. No source, no experience, just a racing heartbeat, a flush of heat rising to my face, and a right hand sweating so much it slipped off the pen. I pressed my lips to look composed, but my throat burned dry, and all that remained in my mind was white noise. That simple question, gentle as it sounded, cut straight through the confident shell I had painted over myself for months. And in that short but searing silence, I came face to face with a cold, quiet truth. I wasn't as trustworthy as I believed. Why do we do that? Because we're afraid. Afraid of not sounding smart, afraid of losing control in a conversation, afraid of being seen as not good enough. So we borrow knowledge, borrow language, borrow the authority of others, borrow experiences that aren't ours. The trap is, it works in the short term. People may nod, they may listen in silence, but respect isn't built on impressions, it's built on authenticity. No one said a word. The meeting went on, but trust had quietly left the room. From that day, I still went to work, still got greeted, but I knew the eyes had changed. No more deep trust, no more expectation. Because once people realize you're performing, no matter how smooth the act, they stop seeing you as real. Epictetus once said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." If you have to explain too much, maybe it's because you haven't truly lived it. Philosophy doesn't sit in words. It lives in the way your eyes meet responsibility, in the calm you hold when nothing is certain, in the attitude you repeat day after day, even when no one's watching. And when I slowly learned to be silent, I discovered something deep, something the ancients had always known. Still waters run deep. The deeper the water, the calmer it flows. The stronger the man, the less he needs to speak, because what is truly strong never needs to prove itself. Now, I'm no longer afraid to say, I don't know. No longer ashamed to admit I haven't lived through that, because I've come to see the one who's respected isn't the one who knows everything, but the one who knows where his edge is and has the courage to live honestly within it. I began replacing bold claims with simpler phrases from what I've personally experienced in my own work. I'm not sure yet, but I'm learning more about it. And I found that the more honestly I spoke, the more deeply people listened. Since then, I chose a different way of living. I started documenting what I had truly experienced, doing before speaking, watching real people, real events before drawing conclusions. I stepped away from impressive talk and entered a quieter, steadier journey, learning every day, doing every day, recording every day. I realized this: if you want people to believe you, live it long enough that no words are needed. If you want real respect, live like every action leaves a mark and let that action speak for you. Because in the end, a mask of competence may help you stand out for a moment, but only real footsteps help you endure in people's trust and memory. Have you ever spoken just to hide the truth that you've never lived it? And if you stayed silent for a moment, admitted just one small thing that you're still learning, still living, still stumbling, would people respect you more? I've lived that answer. And I can tell you without needing to prove anything that sometimes not knowing is the boldest thing you can ever admit. 2. Always in a hurry, but going nowhere. Have you ever felt like you didn't stop for a single minute all week, and yet, by the end of it, nothing truly got done? Your inbox is overflowing. Messages never stop. Your calendar is packed like a head of state schedule. You're constantly on task. But when you step back, not one of those tasks is actually leading you where you want to go. It's all reaction, firefighting, running. I used to be that way. For a time, I believed that being busy was a sign of success. I took pride in having a packed calendar. I felt important when my phone buzzed non-stop. I checked email the moment I woke up, replied to texts while rushing into meetings. I could eat lunch with one hand on a sandwich and the other typing, and in my head I thought, this is how high performers live, always with something urgent to handle. Until one day, in the middle of that whirlwind, I completely forgot about a critical appointment tone I had personally requested. It wasn't just a casual meeting. It was a real opportunity to sit down with someone I had long admired in my field. When I realized, I went still. Not because I feared being blamed, but because, for the first time, I understood I was losing something precious, not because I failed, but because I had let myself get so busy that I could no longer remember what I once saw as important. And right then, I saw it clearly. I wasn't busy because I had a great mission. I was busy because I was afraid to stop, afraid to face the question, am I living with intention or just reacting? Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Haste is the enemy of clarity," and I felt the truth of that line in every corner of my life. When I lived like a reactive machine, I no longer had space to think strategically, no calm to really hear what others were saying, no clarity to see what I was giving up, like someone running through the fog with a torch thinking they're lighting the way, but the faster they go, the more the flame scorches their own hand. There's an old Western proverb that says, "He who runs too fast with a torch in the fog only burns his own hand. I wasn't just lost. I was burning myself with the fever of my own busyness. Later, I met someone as CEO of a leading tech company, and what struck me most wasn't how he ran the business, but his lack of hurry. His schedule was still packed. His decisions still carried weight, but he was never rushed. Always arrived a few minutes early, always sat quietly and observed before speaking, always closed things out cleanly, never frantic, never messy. Once I asked him, "How do you not get swept into the chaos like the rest of us?" He smiled and said, "Busyness is just the symptom of someone who hasn't learned to choose." That sentence hit me hard, not because it was philosophical, but because it was true. From that day, I began doing something simple, planning the night before. But not just a to-do list, also a not-to-do list. I learned to leave room in my calendar, learned to say no to things that led me nowhere. I started limiting how often I checked email. I put my phone far away for the first hour of the morning so I could live my own life before I got pulled into everyone else's. I didn't become free, but I became clear. And it was that clarity, not my speed, that others began to respect in me. Because those who carry real weight don't need to rush to prove anything. They choose which steps are worth taking, which words are worth saying. And as the ancients once said, a strong horse doesn't gallop wildly, a wise man doesn't need to always look busy. The question was never how much you have to do. The question is, among all the things you're doing, is anything actually taking you where you want to go? Are you truly busier, just running from something important you're not ready to face? 3. Words with no weight. When promises stop meaning anything. Once, there was a shepherd boy who cried out, "Wolf!" just to entertain himself. The villagers ran up the hill to help, only to find it was just a prank. The boy laughed heartily. The second time, they still came. But on the third, when a real wolf Camino one returned, the sheep were eaten, and the boy's cries vanished into indifference. Not because people were cruel, but because trust had already died. That story sounds like it belongs to children, but I've seen many adults, educated, accomplished, repeat that same game. The only difference is, instead of shouting, "Wolf," they say, "I'll change. I'll do better next time. I promise I'll be there." And then, they never are. I used to be one of them, not because I meant to deceive, but because I wanted to please. I promised things to soothe others, to keep the atmosphere light. I promised so I wouldn't have to explain more. But once the moment passed, I returned to the rush of work, urgent messages, shifting priorities, and those promises spoken as something sacred quietly turned into phrases that slipped off my tongue and vanished as if they'd never been spoken. I remember once, my daughter, she was only 10, was playing in a small school soccer match. She was excited. The night before, she walked into my room and handed me a paper with the match time. I was drafting an email, nodded and said, "I'll be there, I promise." The next morning, a surprise meeting popped up. Then a deadline got pushed earlier. Then an email that couldn't wait. I missed the match. And when I came home, she simply handed me the same folded paper and said, "It's okay, Dad, maybe next time." What froze me wasn't that she was upset. It was that she wasn't. She had grown used to my absence. My promises no longer made her hopeful or even sad because they had lost all meaning. And I realized, a promise doesn't lose its value because of bad intentions. It loses it when no action follows. There's a Western proverb that says it perfectly. Promises are like babies, easy to make, hard to deliver. It's easy to birth a promise, but raising it, living for it, that's another story. Stoic philosophy doesn't judge a person by their words, it judges by how they live. Epictetus once wrote, "First say to yourself, what you would be. Then do what you have to do. Say to yourself who you want to be, then live it one day at a time. Respect doesn't come from beautiful promises. It comes from whether others can count on you to follow through without needing to remind you. A broken promise doesn't just disappoint. It quietly withdraws people's trust, one layer at a time. First, it's a small thing, a meeting, a callback, a promised visit. But soon, it becomes a pattern, a reputation, an unspoken label that you're the kind of person who just says things, that your words carry no weight. I no longer make casual promises. Instead, I've learned to say, I'll try, but I can't promise. It may sound uncertain, but in truth, it's honesty. Because a maybe dressed up as a yes is not kindness. It's a subtle form of manipulation, making others hope, only to blame themselves when it doesn't happen, like reaching out for an umbrella in the rain, only to find it's just a shadow. And I started living by a new rule. Only promise something if I'm willing to stake my time, my schedule, and cut something else out to make it real. Because if I can't do that, I don't deserve anyone's trust. And what about you? The last promise you didn't keep, do you still remember it? Chances are the other person does. Not because they hold a grudge, but because deep down, we all carry moments where we truly hoped someone would show up for something small, but real. And those small things, when on a dare, what give a person real weight. If you've ever been let down by a broken promises, share that story in the comments. Maybe your experience will be the quiet reminder someone else needed to finally keep their word. 4. Inconsistency. When people no longer know who the real you is. Have you ever looked at someone and silently wondered, what does this person really stand for? Yesterday, they said Principle A was their life rule. Today, they do the opposite because circumstances changed. At times, they seem serious, full of integrity. At others, they drift like someone who's never believed in anything deeply. The more you watch, the more unfamiliar they seem, and at some point, you no longer know who they really are. I once worked under a boss like that, a very talented man, visionary, energetic. But every day at work felt like a guessing game. Today, he wanted one thing. Tomorrow, he shifted in another direction. One moment, he demanded discipline. The next, he encouraged flexibility. He'd say, "This is non-negotiable," only to be the first to compromise a few weeks later. Everyone admired his competence, but over time, it wasn't admiration that faded. It was trust, because no one knew what to follow. No one dared commit to someone whose core identity became a moving target under pressure. Inconsistency isn't a sign of adaptability. It's the symptom of someone who hasn't found their inner foundation. That person reacts to circumstances instead of responding from values. They change tone, principles, positions, not because they've matured, but because they fear upsetting others, fear being left out, fear being labeled too rigid. But that very inconsistency is what exhausts people the most. You may not agree with someone who has clear principles, but you'll still respect them because they're clear. On the other hand, it's hard to respect someone who keeps changing, always with a very reasonable excuse. And more importantly, when you're inconsistent, you quietly erode your own self-trust. Because deep inside, every person needs a center to stand on. Who am I? Where do I stand? What is non-negotiable? Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Be like the rock that the waves keep crashing over. It stands unmoved. Be like the rock in the shore knot, resisting the storm, but never carried away by it." That philosophy doesn't teach you to be rigid. It teaches you to find the part of you that cannot be shaken. In a world that changes by the hour, the trustworthy one isn't the one who knows everything. It's the one who has something that never changes. A value, a principle, a sense of honor that won't be sold. I remember the first time I realized I didn't have that anchor. It was when someone asked me, "So in the end, what is your core principle?" And I couldn't answer, because I had lived for years by reflex. A situation came, I reacted. A question came, I found the convenient reply. But I never stopped to write down what I truly believe in, regardless of who's watching. From that day on, I began doing something that seemed simple. I wrote down 3 non-negotiables, 3 values, that no matter the persuasion, no matter the change, no matter the loss, I would not trade away. And every weekend, I sit with them, not to judge how well I lived, but to ask, did I quietly betray one of those values this week? Trust, both with others and with yourself, is not built by speed. It's built by consistency in 100 small decisions, 1,000 daily responses. It doesn't require grand philosophy. Just live like someone others can lean on, not because you're always right, but because you don't shift truth depending on your mood. And what about you? What value do you truly stand for, and when was the last time you betrayed it? No one else needs to know. Just be honest with yourself. Sometimes, people don't live inconsistently because they have no values, but because they traded those values away just to be liked. And that leads us to something even more dangerous: living to please everyone and losing yourself in the process. 5. Living for approval, but leaving no real mark. There's a Western fable that goes like this. An old man and his grandson were leading a donkey through a village. The first person said, "Why aren't they riding it?" So the old man climbed on. The next one protested, "How can an old man let a child walk?" So he got down and let the boy ride. Then someone else judged, "What a disrespectful kid, making the elder walk." So both got on. But another bystander cried out, "How cruel to overload that poor animal." In the end, they tied the donkey and carried it on their shoulders. The crowd burst out laughing. The donkey panicked, fell into the river, and drowned. In trying to please everyone, they lost everything they had. I'm not telling you this story to make you laugh. I'm telling it so you can look back at all the times you walked into a room and the first thing you did was scan the faces to guess, who should I be today? You change your tone around one person. You hide your opinion in another group. You wait for a nod before daring to speak. You live not from your values, but from other people's reactions. I used to be that way, especially in my early days as a speaker. I wrote articles, gave talks, presented, but my mind was always somewhere else. Do they like me? I'd finish a point without letting it land and ask, did that make sense? I'd wrap up a presentation not by reflecting on the impact of my message, but by going around asking people, was that good? I wasn't speaking to change anyone. I was speaking to get applause. That is the first sign of a dependent mind, unable to validate itself unless someone else's eyes give it permission. People who live this way, no matter how kind, no matter how gifted, rarely leave a lasting mark because they don't take a clear stand. They avoid rocking the boat. They won't commit to a value unless it's already popular. They live as a shadow of collective expectation, and at the end of the day, people may like them, but no one truly knows who they are. Stoicism doesn't oppose being liked, but it points out a terrifying truth. If you seek applause, you are not free. I realized that when I reread some of my old journals, pages filled with schedules, feedback, successful events, but not a single line that asked, did I truly help anyone today? I saw that I wasn't doing the work of a guide. I was simply performing beautifully to be seen through a pleasant lens, and so I changed. I began writing down one question: every night. Did I truly help someone today? Not who liked me, not how many clapped, but whether someone, even just one person, chose to live more honestly because of something I did. I stopped asking others, "Do you think I'm okay?" I started asking myself, "Am I okay with what I just chose?" When you shift your focus from the crowd's reaction to the weight of your own values, you'll notice something strange. People start to respect you, not because you tried to please them, but because you carry something that needs no validation. And if you're exhausted from trying to fit just right for everyone, I want you to know that fit won't save you when your soul feels empty. That same truth reminds me of Keanu Reeves, of the rare living examples in a noisy Hollywood. He doesn't chase fame, doesn't attend lavish parties, doesn't say things to win favor. For years, the media called him bland, weird, detached. But it's that very detachment, needing no crowd, no praise, that built a kind of reputation no one could fake. Throughout his career, he's lived by his own code. Quiet, kind, stage-free. Once, during the filming of The Matrix, Keanu found out a crew member was facing financial hardship. He quietly wired funds so the man could keep his house and never spoke about it. Another time, he was seen sitting with a homeless man in a public square, sharing breakfast, not as charity, but because, in his eyes, that man deserved company. No cameras, no live stream, no applause. When asked why he lives that way, Keanu simply said, "I'm not trying to be kind. I just think I don't need to live by anyone else's script." He is a living testament to Seneca's words. A person who follows the crowd will never go further than the crowd. But the person who walks alone is likely to find himself in places no one has ever been. And if you're exhausted from trying to fit just right for everyone, I want you to know that fit won't save you when your soul feels empty. Have you ever changed yourself just because of someone's glance? And what did that bring besides emptiness? If you've ever lived inside someone else's gaze, you're not alone. Stay with this channel because we're here to help you live from your true values, not with slogans, but by walking quietly through each day as yourself without having to perform for anyone else again. 6. Emotional whiplash, when you tear down what you've built. Have you ever lost a relationship just because of a sentence you said in anger? A word that cut like a knife. It didn't have to be loud, didn't have to shout, just landed at the exact moment they were hurting, and you lost control. Just a few short seconds, but enough to destroy a trust that took years to build. People with emotional swings aren't always bad people. Sometimes they're kind, hard-working, well-meaning, but lacking an inner stillness. So any stressful situation becomes a trigger. They lash out when challenged. They lose composure when misunderstood. They collapse under criticism. And the saddest part is, after every outburst, they're the ones who regret it most. But regret isn't strong enough to erase what's been done. Because once someone's been hurt by your anger, they won't remember how kind you were. Only that you once lost control. I saw this most clearly when working with a CEO during a company crisis. The stock was crashing. Employees were panicking. Rumors spreading. Reporters circling. Everyone in leadership was anxious, arguing, assigning blame. Except for one person, the man at the top, who walked into the boardroom with a strangely calm gaze. No yelling, no defensiveness, no rush to rebut. He said, "We don't solve problems with emotion, we solve them with clarity." And for the next 2 hours, every decision he made was precise, timely, and free of waste. No one spoke behind his back, because everyone knew they had just witnessed a kind of strength that couldn't be bought with power. The strength of a man who had trained himself long before he ever needed to use it. Stoic philosophy calls this inner power. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. You cannot control the world, but you can absolutely control how you respond to it. And real power doesn't lie in status, fame, or position. It lies in your ability to stay grounded when others try to drag you into emotional chaos. It took me years to truly understand that, because for a long time I thought bluntness was strength, that showing emotion was honesty, until I watched myself destroy relationships just because I reacted too fast, too sharp, too raw. I wouldn't hear out a piece of feedback because I was defensive. I wouldn't move forward because one glance made me feel unrecognized. I wouldn't fix things because I was angry. And in that anger, I wasn't hurting anyone more than myself. Quietly, bit by bit. Like smashing the very house I had spent years building with my own hands. So how do you stop the first reaction from taking over? I learned to pause just for a few seconds whenever something triggered the urge to explode. I call it the pause, observe, respond technique. Stop, observe. The emotion within, then respond. Not to suppress, but to create enough space between stimulus and action for you to choose, instead of your emotion choosing for you. I started creating a still zone in my day, not to meditate it, but to get used to myself when there's no one else, no meetings, no emails, no messages. Just silences, a soft layer of armor protecting me from impulsive reactions. It didn't make me softer, but it helped me apologize a lot less. Because in the end, you might forget the times you lost control, but others don't. And sometimes, they don't just remember, they retreat. They pull away. They remove you from their circle of trust. And by the time you realize you're being judged, not for a mistake but for emotional undiscipline, it's already too late. Trust can't be rebuilt by apology alone. It's restored only through calmness, repeated, consistent, and long enough for others to believe you are no longer who you used to be. Because emotions, when properly managed and transformed, aren't enemies. They're fuel, a deep, positive energy that can help you focus, rise, and reach goals that once felt out of reach. And learning to notice, then master your inner emotions, is the first step to building a life that's not just stable, but meaningful and deeply human. 7. Waiting for the perfect day, then never starting at all. Some plans are written with all the excitement of day one. Each bullet point is drawn neatly, every idea cared for like a rare seed. You look at it and you know, if I pull this off, my life will change. But then, a day passes, then a week, then a month. And the plan just sits there on paper. Not because you weren't serious, not because you lacked passion, but because it never felt like the right time. You waited for more time, more knowledge, more recognition, more company. You waited for a state called ready. And now you're still in the same place, only the paper has started to yellow. Procrastination is a quiet lullaby. It doesn't scream, it doesn't tell you to quit. It just whispers, wait, next week. Today isn't the right day, and you listen because it sounds reasonable. You call it caution, you call it strategy, you call it waiting for the right moment. But very few people dare to call it what it is. Fear. Fear that you're not good enough. Fear of being judged. Fear of failing. Fear of succeeding and not being able to hold on. Fear that if you step forward, you can't step back. And in that fear, we choose procrastination as a way to hide soft, rational, but deeply damaging. I used to be like that. I once outlined a course for months. I edited my first video dozens of times. I kept telling myself, wait for a better mic, wait for a better setting, wait until I speak more fluently. But nothing came. Just another year passed, and everything stayed inside the laptop. No one learned, No one was changed. And meet a person who once dreamed of inspiring others was still sitting there, adjusting a line in a video that never got published. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "What stands in the way becomes the way." The obstacle isn't the lack of conditions, it's the storm inside us. And Stoic philosophy never negotiates with that storm. It doesn't wait for convenience. It doesn't wait for the right moment. It doesn't wait for someone to show the path. It lives as if anything can begin right now, from exactly where you stand, because the real fear isn't failure. It's never having started. No lamp ever lit itself by sitting there waiting for light. I remember a friend, he launched a startup during a frozen market. Everyone called him reckless, but he just smiled. "If I wait until everything is stable, I'll just become a copy of whoever came before. I want to build something different, so I have to begin when others stop." 3 years later, that same project became one of the most sought-after platforms in an emerging market, not because it was perfect, but because it began at a time when nothing was. From that experience, I created a concept I call the ethical deadline. It's a personal promises mall, concrete and bound by a date and time. Send the first email by 9 a.m. Monday. Post the first article within 72 hours. Lock in the first meeting before the month ends. These are tiny actions, but if you honor them, you start to build trust in yourself. And the strange thing is, when you keep promises with small things, others begin to believe you can handle the bigger ones too. Is there something you once wanted to do but still haven't started? A project? A trip? An apology? A new direction in life? If so, stop and ask yourself, what exactly are you waiting for? A perfect spark? A solid guarantee? Someone's approval? Or simply your own permission? If you're waiting for the perfect day, then today is it. Not because the sky is clear, not because you're finally ready, but because you've spent too long in the land of almost. And sometimes, the difference between a year wasted and a year transformed comes down to a single decision. Begin. Right now. No audience needed. No grand entrance required. Just. Don't step back again. If there's something you've delayed for too long and still haven't begun, share it in the comments. Not to complain, but to draw the line and end the delay starting today. You've just walked through 7 habits, not to cross out any version of yourself, but to realize respect doesn't come from the big things you say, but from the small things you repeat every single day. No one will scream at you that you're no longer trustworthy, but one day they'll stop asking for your input in meetings. They'll stop telling you about the things that matter. They'll smile but no longer expect. And you'll understand. There was no betrayal. No failure, just enough broken promises, enough interruptions where none were needed, enough jokes to dodge what mattered, and trust quietly withdrew, without a word. Stoicism doesn't teach you to become perfect. It teaches you to face what's true even when it hurts. That you don't have to earn respect by being loud, clever, or intimidating. You just have to live as someone with a core, someone who knows when to speak, when to stay silent, and when to keep a promise made to themselves. And then you'll see no one teaches others to respect you. They simply respond to the life you actually live. If this video made you pause and reflect, then don't just reflect, write in the comments. Here's where I'll start. Not to impress anyone, but so you can see for yourself that you've truly begun. And if you're looking for a place where you don't have to shout to be heard, don't have to armor up just to be taken seriously, just a place that helps you live more truthfully with each day. Stay with Stoic App. We don't promise to change you. We're simply here to help you not lose yourself again.